Before I begin, I want to mention that there was a lot that led up to this video. I have made an analysis video of the first iteration of Garage, Bad Dream Adventure, and a lot of thoughts explained in that video will be used in this one. But I won't explain them all over again for the sake of brevity, so it is useful to watch that video first. In this video I also aim to dissect the story and meaning of the 2021's mobile remake of Garage Bad Dream Adventure, so naturally there will be a lot of spoilers for the entire game. So having played the game yourself or watched my playthrough will not only save you from getting the plot spoiled, but will help to understand what I'm talking about greatly. I had made a full playthrough of the original 1999 version of the game, but that is no longer a crucial watch in order to understand this analysis, as I'm going to focus only on the remake. Garage Bad Dream Adventure is also full of imagery and topics that may not be comfortable for all, so look out for that. Seriously, this is pretty much everything I could think of warning about. Hello, now we can properly welcome you to my second analysis type video of Garage Bad Dream Adventure. The 2021 remake of the game did not only add updated visuals and an official English translation to the game, but also a significant amount of new content that transforms the meaning of the story. Originally, the game felt a lot more vague and mysterious. Therefore, my analysis too was created using fairly broad and abstract strokes, focusing more on the world and logic of Garage. Its core themes and ideas. While the remake doesn't make most of my conclusions invalid, it transforms the story into something a lot more concrete and personal, making the original feel almost incomplete in comparison. Likewise, I will breeze past the world building quicker this time, so I could delve more into dissecting individual characters. It's been quite a while since my last analysis video, so I imagine I'm not the only one who needs a refresher. Here are some main ideas that came out of it. Garage had changed a lot before the main character appeared in it. Due to heavy industrialization and growth of consumerism, a lot of old ways were forgotten. Most machines work for the currency of stamps in order to get fuel instead of fishing and producing fuel themselves. Toys, music, and similar pieces of entertainment that don't produce any material gain were mostly forgotten. There is a major theme of duality in the game. The main character is split into two personalities: the clueless protagonist that is trying to make things right, and the antagonist who shaped the garage into what it is, and used to generally be extremely destructive. There is a meta theme that Garage initially feels a lot more scary than it actually is. Thanks to the Luda narrative, both the player and the protagonist gradually get more and more used to the disturbing world to the point where it almost feels cozy. There are also dialogue lines in the game that support this theory of mine. There is a great imbalance between genders in Garage. Females are exploited to produce fuel. The refueling process, that appears to be intimate and pretty much sexual, has been turned into something completely transactional and emotionless. Garage is a dream world, produced by someone's mind. It is a product of the garage machine showcased in the beginning of the game. All machines, with rare exceptions, have a corresponding human-like creature called Shadow each. Shadows belong to a different world than Garage. Most shadows are either already dead or horribly disfigured in the game, and most of them look female. There is only one exception to that. The only male-looking shadow in the game belongs to the protagonist, suggesting that it might be what is called the perfect shadow, which is the key to the whole world. Ain and Gotari are machines who never had shadows to begin with, and the things they tell suggest that they are the creators of Garage. Lastly, there was only one thing that was left as a loose end: the enigma of the tortured hermaphrodite character Lou. Lou had been modified into having both male and female parts, which, considering the great gender imbalance in this world, is very significant. And they were shown being abused sexually, which was also unusual due to how sexual intercourse had been made into something completely transactional and emotionless, to the point where there would be no actual sex out of passion and love, so sexual abuse without getting fuel back out of the female machine was unheard of in terms of the game. Now, with the remake of the game, there are multiple endings. it is a lot more likely that a player who has never experienced the game before will fall into the trap of one of 3 endings which could be considered bad. Like in the original version of the game, the player can invite one of the 3 female milky fuel machines to live with them as a partner. In the remake, this choice, which without prior knowledge doesn't even feel like much of a choice, locks the player into an ending. Every possible female partner has their own ending. After having locked in with a partner, defeated Shen, the protagonist's alter ego, found the ordinary stone and caused the infamous Wang Shui, the flow of time, which had been halted, gets resumed, and the monstrous female machine Juice, who produces the great majority of fuel in Garage, starts breaking down, meaning the world is suddenly deprived of the main source of fuel and will soon die out. Most of the characters blame Yang, the protagonist, for it before their inevitable death. Some of the scientists, who are more familiar with the inner workings of Garage, suggest that Yang was meant to pair up with Juice instead of one of the random milky fuel machines. Aside from experiencing the horrific deaths of Garage's inhabitants, the bad endings have new lines of dialogue that are important when trying to paint a full picture of Yang's past. Going over the good ending first will make the other ones make more sense though. Provided that the player hasn't coupled up with any of the milky fuel machines after confronting Shen towards the end of the game, it is possible to pair up with Juice, the grotesque machine that's powering most of Garage. She is the existence that even the old Yang turned into Shen could not destroy. However, this time around, instead of being able to leave Garage right after the grand duel with their alter ego, Yang is stopped by Juice, like Shen before him. While being powerful beyond belief, Juice's existence also appears incredibly flawed, since she is unable to move or even speak properly. Her one power is the ability to survive whatever's thrown at her. Being forced to stay in Garage, the player has not much else to do but to indulge in fishing, trying to catch the mightiest frog of them all while upgrading their body to the maximum. In the remake, upon being caught, Wang Shui gives a brand new lore dump that is outside the world Yang's notes. They are very scatterbrained, odd, and in my opinion, quite wrong. Talking about impossible, one-way relationships, rejecting ethics and love in favor of cruelty, rebelling against society's passiveness by incredible feats of violence. The flawed philosophy aside, there are some facts. A confession of him murdering an unnamed woman, a woman who according to him was asking to be hurt, with her goal being the result of violence. Incredible, lustful sadomasochism, not much unlike the one of Kakeharu's from Ichi the Killer. Yan was the one who gave in and caused the violence, believing he was gradually getting more numb and delving deeper into the hole the lady yearns for, only to eventually go overboard and fail by mutilating her to death and realizing that they were never in the same hole to begin with. This craving to inflict violence checks out considering the initial Yang's in Garage aggression towards female machines, as well as his obsession with forcefully modifying bodies of his own, other machines, and shadows. But that is only one side of the story. Throughout the ending, machines around Garage begin having strange dreams of the outside world, suggesting that they are more than just machines, that they actually had human lives prior to appearing in Garage. The most important of these dreams is the one from Juice. She happens to be the woman who was abused and killed by Yang. She has precious memories of having a teddy bear, which suggests she was likely still a child when the horror started, but she was abused in all sorts of ways as far as she could remember. She doesn't go into much detail, but the abuse could have been anything from verbal to physical and sexual. She had no place she could feel safe at. It's unclear how long this has been going on, but eventually she was taken elsewhere by people who did not harm her, at least directly. I assume she could have been taken to some sort of a hospital or shelter. She also describes all the people as masks without eyes. Those who were abusing her, those who took her away, the only exception being Yang. Apparently, he was the only one who was genuine and understood her. He was actually trying to care for her, and she wanted to care for Yang back. But she had no clue how. All she knew in her life was receiving violence. She equated herself to a human garbage can, receiving trash from anyone. The only way she knew how to love was to let people throw away their garbage and take it all for herself. All of the pain. So, she asked Yang to throw his garbage into her. Initially, Yang refused, but he changed his mind and hurt Jews like no one else. This is a direct parallel of Jews also being made into a completely disfigured machine in garage, and Yang being the one who made her that way. At this point, it couldn't be clearer that there are obvious parallels between the outside world and garage. It makes sense that garage is a dream world, and what's in it are actually projections of a single mind, as opposed to it being a dream hub of multiple people, as I thought in my original analysis. It has been said in the game that Yang saw machines as empty cans, similar to how Jews saw people as masks without eyes. These machines were not real people by themselves, but they all had shadows, which I could interpret as their links to the real world, being a lot more human-like, using the machines as masks suitable for garage. Yang was more or less aware of it, and the thought of no one else but him being real enabled him to be completely relentless and merciless. All of the machines were people Yang was somehow familiar with in the outside world, but all of them were also just projections of his mind, his made-up ideas of who these people were. Similar to how people are said to wear masks, metaphorically, hiding their true selves, similar effect exists when perceiving others. It is very easy to create a mental image of someone that doesn't necessarily correspond with how the people really are, regardless whether this image is idolized or antagonized. The true goal of Garage is to break a false mental image Yang has stuck in his mind. The Garage contraption from the game's intro is called Garage because it's a mental repair shop of sorts. Yang has suffered severe trauma that needs to be overcome. First, he needs to accept the horrific world as it is. Then, he needs to defeat and overcome his past self, the violent and abusive Shen. Lastly, he needs to make peace with Jews and overcome his own violent desires, which ends up being the most convoluted task. During Juice's ending, multiple machines within Garage confessed that they took part in modifying Jews, meaning they were among the abusers. The same machines that found it too difficult to think about anything other than their everyday boring jobs because it would drain them of their ego, especially something as crazy as dreams. That was pretty much a taboo in Garage. Juice was an undesired existence to everyone, but to Yang she became the desire itself. Yang started perceiving her as this enormous personality, able to withstand anything, mystifying and deifying her to a degree. Both Yang and Juice were undergoing strenuous body modifications like no other machine, but while Yang was equipping himself to cause violence, Juice was being equipped to survive it. It's the separate holes they're delving into. Juice also accepted the modifications better. She outgrew Yang and was no longer able to be killed by him in Garage. Meanwhile, Yang lost his own self while modifying himself and turned into Shen. One of the things required to progress the plot in the game is acquiring the aforementioned Ordinary Stone. That stone is a bit like a parallel to Juice herself. While trying to find it, Yan has to confirm that even the Ordinary Stone has value, not only if it's perceived as garbage, but even if it might harm or kill him. Eventually, the Ordinary Stone turns into Resurrection Stone, something with real, perceivable value. Just like the stone, Juice was hurting Yang too all along, and there is also more to her than it initially seems. This is where Lou's mystery comes into action. At a late point in the story, Juice keeps asking Yang to play her the noise core, to cast the most powerful destructive force upon her, but she also drains Yang of all of his ego, and makes him use the Resurrection Stone. After that, Juice turns back into a regular-looking female machine with her sanity a lot more intact. She figures out that both her and Lou possess the same shadow, Psyche, meaning they are actually one and the same person. In their dream, Juice was disassociating from her own self due to all of the abuse, just like how in Garage, she forgot that at some point she used to be Lou, the powerless girl with nowhere to go. Aside from Lu having disassociated from her own existence, Garage is still projected by Yang's mind. He sunk so deep into his own hole trying not to feel guilt hurting Lu, he forgot all about her and created the idolized character of Juice in his mind. It was his perception of Lu being an indestructible force that turned her into a gargantuan monster that she never really was. The last thing Yang needs to do in the game, before moving on and leaving Garage, is accepting that Juice's real name is Lu, to accept that she was never a monster, but rather the victim all this time, to accept his own guilt instead of trying to suppress it. That was also the reason why the original Yang was hunting shadows too. A single shadow corresponds to a perfect existence. A perfect shadow is a threat to Garage. It's the only thing that can end it, yet Yang himself is linked to the shadow that can't become perfect. The shadow, the link to the outside world, turning into a perfect existence, would result in the end of the mental repair, meaning that Yang would have to accept this guilt and admit being wrong. But what about the other endings then? What do the regular milk fuel station machines have to do with any of this? Well, there is an overarching theme of abusive relationships in the game. As I have already figured it out in my previous analysis, there is essentially no more romance, but now there also happen to be more examples of relationships gone wrong, which makes sense considering that the world of Garage is a projection of Yang's psyche. One of the better examples is Lee murdering Liz, the fourth milky fuel machine, essentially just because of his own insecurities. Lee's and Liz's place is also where the ordinary stone is found, by the way. A lot of the female machines in Garage have some sort of projection of Lu in them, and her relationship with Yang. Also, there is the shadow thing. We only ever see 5 of them. One is Yang's, one is shared by Juice and Lu, but then there are these 3 left. Seeing them for the first time is an impactful moment, but in the original version, they didn't bear much meaning within them. One thing is easy to point out. Each of these 3 shadows belong to the 3 milky fuel machines remaining. What is completely new to the remake are the endings, in which Yang couples up with one of them. In each of the endings, the female machines have dreams of their past. Past in which they knew Yang in the outside world. If Juice, Lu, and Psyche being one and the same sound wild to you, it's about to get wilder. Because I believe the 3 fuel machines are also representations of Lu during different periods of her life. It makes me wonder if other machines ever having shadows too was a lie all along or not, because all the shadows the player actually gets to see belong to either Yang or Lu, the only characters that really matter. First, there is Michio, the youngest and the most timid of the 3. Her shadow is the least broken and most childlike looking one. She has a memory of her and Yang's first meeting. She mentions that she didn't want to go back home, likely because she was already being abused there at a very young age. She and Yang became friends, but she would get bullied by other kids. Yang attempted standing up for her, only to get thrown into a ditch and almost drowning. The girl managed to pull him out, all but the sneakers. It finally makes sense why Yang's core memory is the lost sneakers. The first contact with Lu also marks the beginning of Yang's struggle too. Him being pulled out of the ditch is like a mirror image of the very beginning of Garage, where Yang wakes up in this house after having almost drowned in the sewage. Next up is Reiko. She has roughly teenage-looking shadow, which in the uncensored version of the game is horribly contorted. Reiko has a memory of being terribly bullied at school. Yang was the only one who stood up for her again, resulting in her getting some peace, but Yang getting bullied in her stead. He would get all wounded and left in a pool of his own blood. Shan is the most mature of the 3, and her memory seems like the most recent one. Lu and Yang seem to have just gotten into a relationship, and Yang was getting Lu to do all sorts of weird things, possibly it being the beginning of the tortures too. Shan also points out that the difference between her and Yang was that she was always satisfied, while Yang was never so. He always needed more. His lack of satisfaction led him to depression and the couple splitting up. It is implied multiple times in the game that Yang and Lu had completely forgotten about each other. Like the milky fuel machines, Lu is also a mirror of Yang's past. He finds her in a hospital, like Lu has implied in her ending. It was then when they got back together and sparked something within each other, something leading to a lot of violence. Each of the female shadows is like a representation of Lu's state in different stages of the relationship. With each iteration, the shadow would get more and more broken, until Psyche, the deified magnum opus of Yang. It almost makes more sense in the censored version, with Psyche being an opened up cadaver of a woman with her heart wide for display. Like with the machine body upgrades, Yang in the outside world was pushing the limits of the human body as a form of rebellion against society, until he eventually unwillingly brought Lu to her limit, and she died by his hand. Lu stayed with him, because Yang was the only one who understood her, and to a degree she seemed to feel happy, but Yang could never have been satisfied. This makes the original Yang's in Garage actions make more sense. They were direct representation of his real-world actions. He was torturing and murdering female machines in the New World for entertainment, on display for everyone. That includes Lu and the milky fuel machines and their shadows. He was hunting down females and shadows until he finally realized his violence is unsustainable and he needs to do something about it. That's when the new Yang is born. Their duel symbolizes both Yang's attempted suicide in the real world and him being reborn as a person, trying to do better for once. In the bad endings, Yang ditches Juice and leaves her to fall to her own hole and die, favoring something more appealing at the first sight than her. In the good ending, Yang decides to be with Juice, the monstrous creature, and stand up for Lu one more time. So, essentially, under the cover of surreal and grotesque visuals, Garage is a story about a couple of heavily tormented people. One of them just felt powerless and continued getting abused, and the other decided to rebel against the world and turn himself into an abuser himself. The implications of this story are still up for some interpretation, and those implications to me leave a bitter taste. Just the way Lu was abused her whole life ever since she was a child is horrifying. Garage's world being a fruit of Yang's mind suggests that a lot of events that took place within it are tied to events that he experienced in the outside world. One of the most worrying things is Yang's creation of the New World, a place where torture and murder would be performed for public's entertainment. New World was no longer operational. Some of the New World machines ended up in the hospital, out of which they couldn't really escape. In there, Lu was constantly sexually abused by one of the hospital workers, Medici. This implies that the real Lu could have been abused until she became almost comatose, unable to move and speak, at which point she was hospitalized, where she was continued being raped by the hospital staff, as she had neither the mental nor physical strength to resist it. It's hard to even think of a more bleak scenario for a person. In Garage, Yang was the one who established the New World, and in Lu's dream he was one of the people who took her away. Even if there was any romance between the two, even if brutally sadomasochistic, Yang came to it from a place of power, which is still quite immoral. To mask his own guilt, he reversed the roles in his head, making Lu appear as the stronger one. Whatever happened, Yang still abused and murdered Lu. He might have tried protecting her from others numerous times at first, but eventually, after receiving a lot of abuse trying to protect Lu, he lost his own self and became an even more terrible abuser. There isn't any concrete evidence to whether Garage Bad Dream Adventure that was experienced by Yang was therapy to overcome trauma or not. I can only make the deduction that Ain and Guattari were most likely the ones to subject Yang to Garage, as they claimed they created it and had no shadows, no links to the outside world, meaning Yang didn't really know them. They could just be workers in whatever institution was using the garage apparatus and observing the mental repair status. It could have also been a punishment for Yang's crime, making him go through both the horrors of garage and having to re-experience his repressed memories of the horrors he committed, having to see all the violence from an outside perspective, being split into two personalities in garage. Accepting the guilt would supposedly turn Yang for the better, but I'm really not the one to be able to solve these kind of moral dilemmas. Who can really tell if a person can really change? If a murderer or a rapist can successfully reintegrate into society? Maybe it's something possible within the fictional world of Garage, but I wouldn't be so sure about the real one. It is important to acknowledge oneself's crimes, but that does not automatically grant forgiveness. One would want to hope that people can make better of themselves, but these are also crimes with no excuse. And that's what I got out of Garage Bad Dream Adventure. However questionable the implications I made out of the game may be, I still value Garage greatly as a piece of art, even if portrayal of rape is pretty much never tasteful. It was fascinating to see the game turn from something fairly vague into something a lot more concrete, criticizing the passive, material society for turning a blind eye to both crimes and the real values in life, forgetting the importance of simple joys and not so simple love. That's it for me. If you feel like I missed anything, or if you have different thoughts about the game, leave them in the comment section. I'd love to hear all about it. Thank you for watching, and see you in another video.